Hey everybody, it's Bust with no battles with Bust today. Today we're going to be talking about the Runeterra Open, and so we'll be back to the daily gameplay videos tomorrow. But the Runeterra Open was such a big thing, such a highlight of the week. I wanted to take a kind of independent video to come in and talk about it a little bit, as there's also a bit of controversy running around with it as well. And so, in terms of the event itself, we went 9-2. I had a pretty good time with it. If you're wanting to see our run, we've got most of it over on YouTube. We played a few rounds, and then I got kinda tilty, and I wasn't really in the mood to continue on the video, and so I just continued the rest off stream, and then we were in that position to get up to the 9-win mark, and so we finished off the recording the rest of the way. And I think that really kind of ties into why I love this format so much. If you look at the Mastering Runeterra event from the week before, I'm not talking trash on their event. It's just the way that the format has to be run, to where there's kind of a set schedule, to where you play one round at 1 o'clock, you play one round at 2 o'clock, you play one round at 3 o'clock. You really just have to kind of devote your entire day to the event, and you have to really lock in to just being available for like 9 or 10 hours dedicated straight through. And so if you have a job, or you have an event, or you need to leave the house to go get lunch or something, it can really hamper your ability to play that kind of event. And so again, there's nothing wrong with that style. They run an excellent event. We played with it, had no complaints. But I really like this open format that Riot uses here. You see it on Magic Online a little bit, in terms of, just play your games whenever you can across the course of this 8, 10, 12 hours, however long the time period is. And so, at least for me personally, I was able to play 3 rounds. We took a break, jumped into the 4th round, got really tilty, took a bigger break. I just kind of chained off 5 matches or whatever off stream. Felt pretty good about life again, so we took another break, came back, recorded the last game. That's just not something you can do with that kind of locked-in hourly format. And so, there's pros and cons to this style, to where the matchmaking is kind of weird and the times can be kind of weird and stuff. But in general, and especially for a first shot at it coming from Riot, I thought that this went pretty fantastic, and I can really only hope for even greater things to come in the future, if you will, as I thought that this went pretty well. And so before we start to talk about the event itself and my kind of thoughts and feelings on it, I do feel the need to kind of give a little bit of history on myself, so that I'm not just some dum-dum that hasn't been around the block 2 or 3 times. I am fucking old. I'm in my late 30s. I started playing competitive Magic when I was in my early teens, like 13 or 14. There used to be a thing called the Junior Super Series for kids 15 and under competing for college scholarships. That's where I really kind of started playing competitively. After that, qualified for nationals a few times, qualified for the Pro Tour a few times, never played in the Pro Tours, and then have various experience with the likes of Grand Prix and Star City Opens, and having some decent runs in those. And so as we come to start talking about Ruben Zhu, nowhere near his level of pedigree. It's just not even close, the level of skill he has compared to me. But I have been in tune with the competitive scene in Magic for well over a decade, and I've seen a lot of the good and a lot of the bad that can kind of come out of these things. And so it's not like this Runeterra Open was my first event and I'm making some kind of mega hot take based on the results of it. I have a kind of a lot of experience throughout the history of competitive gaming, and I feel like that helps to give a little perspective in terms of what we're about to talk about. And so, as we'd made mention of Ruben Zhu, we've got his Twitter pulled up. It's a fantastic follow if you're into the game of Runeterra, and he has a high pedigree of meme abilities as well. And so he's a highly recommended follow if you want to be a part of the community. But Ruben Zhu, he's again a very accomplished card gamer. You can see on the right side of the screen, he's won a Magic Pro Tour. He's top aided a lot of Grand Prix. He's won some Star City Games events. He is a absolutely fantastic wizard back in his days of competitive play, and now he's a senior game developer over at Riot. He handles most of the balance stuff and a lot of the competitive stuff, and so it's very interesting to kind of see his take when these things come up. And before the event even starts, I think that this is where the kind of things that should be setting the tone for the rest of the video come from. And so if you take a peek at his main tweet, this is from a couple of days before the event, but it says tournaments are in active development. Active. That means they're still working on it and stuff, you know? And so improvements are coming. They're trying to make the system healthy for a long time. And so ideally, you should be able to, you know, kind of get right from the start that the turd hasn't completely been polished, right? There might still be a few nuggets of corn in the turd, if you will. They haven't been plucked out and got the thing ready for perfection, and so there's still some work to be done. The other thing I like to kind of call out from this thing is that they're talking a little bit about matchmaking. Matchmaking is what we'll end up talking about next, but it says we're working on matchmaking adjustments for the Gauntlets in Open that will have a healthier spread of records for these more competitive events. And so as the beta season kind of event was there, you did kind of run into this problem to where you could queue into the same person multiple times in a row. I did not see that happen in this Open. I didn't see any reports of people queuing into the same person as well. There's other matchmaking style things that were at play, but I think these are number one and number two, the biggest takes to kind of get yourself into perspective with, in that tournaments are still in development. The thing you're seeing today is not the finished product. You know, I talk about the World of Warcraft problem a lot in the channel in terms of people really see that 20 years of development that has gone into the World of Warcraft and think that that has to apply to a new game as it comes out. And you see the kind of same thing with Magic. Magic has had 30 years of development behind it. Now that the new game comes out, people expect the new game to have the same benefits of that 30 years of development from Magic. Then my take on it is, you know, if you actually want the game to get out there, you want to play it, you have to accept that some of these things aren't going to be quite as polished. All of the features aren't going to be available as the games are released, and you got to kind of wait on it a little bit. And I think that that's a fairly reasonable take from here, that the tournaments are in active development, the matchmaking is not completely finished, and that's in progress, and it's in the way and in the works. Okay, so the next piece is going to be on matchmaking. We talked about that matchmaking. There we go. We said that term a few times across the previous portion of the video, and I think that that's where a lot of the problems and concerns came from in terms of this event. And so I think in terms of matchmaking, I think it's nice to first take a look at Magic. I call it Magic Online. I know it's Magic Arena, but Magic Arena's open events, I think that that's a fantastic style of event. Then I kind of want to circle back to Riot's version of the event and then talk about the matchmaking a little bit more. And so I've got the Magic Arena page pulled up. I wanted to talk about it just a little bit. I know it's a different game, but to the best of my knowledge, this is the first way that there's really been one of these kind of open event style things out and about in the lands of competitive card gaming. Maybe there's been another one I'm just not aware of, but the way that Magic Online approaches it is that there's an entry fee. You can buy in as many times as you want. You play until you either get X number of wins or X number of losses, and then you can kind of rebuy at any time. So if you jump into the event, you go 1 and 3, you say, oh crap, I really want to qualify for this, let me jump in again. You can qualify again, you can queue again, you can keep queuing until you either run out of time or you run out of money, or until you get that ultimate set of wins. I think that's a pretty interesting and fantastic idea. It pushes away from that, more aged approach of round 1 starts at 1, round 2 starts at 2, round 3 starts at 3, and it really opens you up to playing whenever you want, as many times as you want. Then once you have that invitation token, you've hit that maximum number of wins, you move on to the second day to where you play in a more competitive style format. You're playing only against those invitation only winner style players, and then you run into a very similar kind of event as to where it's a draft version up here. So you play 4 rounds of draft. If you get 3 wins or 4 wins, you qualify for the next draft, and then within that next draft you play a top cut style of event to finish off the day. I do believe in the constructed versions, you just play until you either get 6 wins or 2 losses, which is kind of a repeat of the day 1 style. But to the best of my knowledge, this is the first kind of reiteration style of event that pushes away from the Swiss style of pairings and puts you in this more open style of event. Now, this does have some kind of caveats to success for it. You do have to say, you know, hey, start here. Hey, you have to end by here. You can run into issues with matchmaking to where if you don't have enough players, you could never get paired. You can run into some issues with say what happens if I start my run before the timer ends at the end of the day. You know, there's some like weird things that can come up, but I think this is the first kind of iteration of this style of thing, and Riot is presenting their own take of this style. I don't know if there's a name for this style or not, but Riot's is a little bit different. And so to kind of give a highlight of the Riot style, if you will, of this kind of event, this is a single buy-in event. You don't get to retry as the event goes on. If you go 0-2 and have to drop, you don't get to come in and play again. But the neat thing that Riot does tie into this is the kind of integration into the gauntlet system, as to where as you progress through the gauntlet trophy space, the competitive trophy space, whatever we're calling it these days, I'm not entirely certain, you can acquire buys. And so that is something that you don't see in any other game. It gives you a lot of tie-in and a lot of incentive to go and play in the daily style gauntlet event, so you can acquire those trophies, and then you get the free wins as you battle throughout the big open tournaments. And so you don't get to see that in the other games, and I'm not entirely certain how it ties in. I believe that your buys count as a 2-0 in terms of the matchmaking at the end of the day. So if you have to have a good record match win wise to make the top cut, then that helps to tie in. It was a little bit more effective in Magic Grand Prix, to where the top tiebreaker was your opponent's match win percentage. So if you didn't play an opponent in round one because you had a bye, then your opponents had a 100% match win rate. Whereas if you're playing against normal people, right, and then so you're in, say you had a bye in round one, and round two you play a person and they lose to you, they're going to have a less than 100% match win rate, as they tie in and factor into your tiebreakers, to where those buys would never drop below 100% because you never played an actual player. And so getting a 2-0 win and having it count towards game wins as opposed to match wins isn't nothing, right? 2-0 is most certainly better than 2-1, but it used to be a little bit better in the terms of Magic Grand Prix. But that's getting into the weeds a little bit too much. In terms of Riot, though, you know, you get the one buy-in, you get the buys, it ties into the whole tournament system. I think that's all well and good. Again, it's different than Magic, but I think it's different in a good way. But it does open up a few different concerns and a few different problems, if you will, in terms of the matchmaking and the structure of the event. And so the first piece, the first big problem, if you will, is how the matchmaking actually works. We're going to call this section MMR versus match win. And so what this basically means is, if you were playing in a Swiss style of tournament, is to where round one starts at 1 o'clock, round two starts at 2 o'clock, and it's all spread out to where everyone starts their match at the same time, you should be playing against someone with the same record as you. And so at the very beginning, you can play against anyone. If you are 2-0 in the event, you should play against someone else that's 2-0. If you're 6-0 in the event, you should play against someone else that's 6-0. This is the space to where as you do progressively better in the event, you should be playing against other people that are doing progressively better. And the matchmaking in terms of fairness gets kind of fixed, right? You assume that weaker players are going to start to lose, the cream is going to rise to the top, and the better players are going to be doing battle against the better players. Now, when you move away from this system to where everyone starts the event at the exact same time, you run into a handful of problems. Number one is, how long should I have to sit in a queue to wait for a match, right? If I'm 1-0, we should have a large collection of 1-0s just out and about and hanging out, ready to queue up. That's not that big of a deal. But if we say I'm 8-0, how much time should I have to spend waiting on a match? Should I have to wait 10 minutes? Should I have to wait 15 minutes? After I wait 15 minutes, what is the degree that the matchmaking should shift just to find me an opponent, right? If I wait 10 minutes, should I then face someone that's a 7-0? If I have to wait another 10 minutes, would it give me someone that's a 6-0? What's the difference between a 6-0 and a 6-1? What's the difference between a 6-1 and a 6-2? Right? There's a lot of various degrees and a lot of various ideas that can go into this, and that's just something that's going to have to be hashed out. My major concern with this style of pairing is we're in that space to where we're 8-0, right? But we're also late in the day, and I need to maybe get 3 or 4 matches in. I only have maybe 60 minutes of time left before the actual event timer is over. Should I be punished because I can't queue into an opponent, right? That's a very real and valid concern. Not even so much that I might need to complete 3 or 4 different matches. How much time do I just have to sit here and wait and hope that an opponent turns up to have my tournament continue on? And so there are some very real and valid concerns with this. If you want to sit down and say, okay, I'm playing this set of decks, the average amount of time that these decks needs is 30 minutes. I'm going to give myself 45 minutes in terms of game time, time allocation to fit myself into this event. Now I'm finding myself in these 30 and 40-minute queues, and my event is just busted, right? And so you can run into some issues in that way, and there has to be some kind of way to fix it. And so I think Riot is working on that. We saw the tweet from Ruben Zoo that says this is under construction and we're still currently working on it. I don't have that much problem with it. The second piece to this is something that I also think sounds like it's going to get fixed. I personally don't have much of a problem with it, but we're going to switch over to the MMR-based matchmaking, which appears to have been a fairly relevant thing in this Runeterra Open. And so what we kind of found out earlier in the day, at least in terms of the Runeterra Open, is that it appeared that there was some matchmaking based on MMR, or what it to me sounded like it was based on kind of like your collection level. And so what you were seeing was players that may only be in like new accounts, or they may just be kind of hard stuck in bronze, tended to kind of get paired together. And the way that this was kind of becoming apparent was you had highly skilled players from other games just kind of show up to the Runeterra event, jump in, and have this super easy cruise through when you look through their match history. Their match history was littered with players that weren't playing 6 champions, they weren't playing on meta decks, they were looking like that they were just kind of new accounts. And that's the kind of thing to where if you were playing in a Swiss-based system, it would just kind of fix itself, right? You have someone show up to the event, they're playing with the starter deck, they're probably going to do pretty poorly, they get knocked out of the event pretty quickly. But when we're in this space of having these kind of variable concerns, or concern isn't the right word. We have these variable requirements, I should say, in terms of setting up a match, in terms of finding people by match record, but also finding people within a certain set of time. I think it was kind of okay that thing happened. We did have some people that made the top cut that in a general sense probably shouldn't, but if that's what it takes for us to get into this space to where we have relatively fast queues and I'm able to play the game spread out throughout the day. I can take an hour shit break in the middle of the day. I can go have dinner with my wife at some point. I don't have to dedicate the entire day just for me to be able to play in this event, then I'm kind of okay with that. If that one person sneaks in, it doesn't feel like it really ruins the competitive integrity of the event. They just get to, maybe get that little bit of prestige when they may or may not deserve it. And so where that kind of ties into the next section is I'm just going to call it the MMR whoopsies. And so it's kind of tough. I don't think that the people that pulled this off did it knowingly, but you did have some people that turned up on Smurf accounts. And so like how we have the main FTP Bust account, and then I have a secondary account, Bust FTP on YT, in the previous Open, I just played the second account on the second day just as another way to come in and make some kind of content. But there were people in this event that got knocked out of the main event in their main region, jumped on a Smurf, jumped back into the queue. They unknowingly got one of these super easy run-throughs because there was this weird MMR-based matchmaking or collection-level-based matchmaking that was putting them against easy people, and then they went and did make the top cut and then advanced well into the event. Now, this is something I don't think the words like egregious really apply. I feel like as you're on the internet, you kind of find yourself in this space to where your take has to be the hottest, you have to yell the loudest, you have to use the most caps in the sentence so people notice what you're doing. And I think that this is a space to where you have to say, oh, okay, well, that's not right. Something needs to be done about this. But I think in general, this kind of setup to where the queues flow nice and fast is pretty good. Now, where I did want to kind of like circle back with this idea is looking at Magic Online, they do have this fixed, right? The idea with this being, if I am an ultra competitive player, I jump into the event, I go 0-2, I have to drop, I could just rebuy, right? I can jump right back into the event. You can't do that here, right? Riot designed this to be a free event that anyone could play in, and you get one shot. And so that idea does open it up to this kind of thing, to where you're able to jump back into an event on a Smurf account, and then you're able to potentially get multiple shots at an event that you really should have only got one try with. Now, for me, I don't understand the reasoning of doing this. If you want to imagine that you're a Drissoth or a Majin Bay or what am I of the world, you're really out there and actively competing to be in that world space. I don't entirely understand where this is beneficial for you. So if you are, ranked number one in the world as Drissoth number one on terms of Riot accounts, and you jump into the Runeterra Open, you lose. Sad day for you. You had a bad run of luck. And so you say, well, my day's not going to be done. I'm going to sign into Drissoth number 2 account. I jump in, I make the top cut, I win the event. Now, what is like supposed to realistically happen for him in this instance? He has rank 1 in NA on Drissoth number 1. He's, done really well in the top cup on Drissoth number 2. He either is risking getting banned as a worst case scenario, or a best case scenario, he has to just kind of like pick one of these accounts that he wants to be his active account for the rest of the way, and then he can't really do these shenanigans again in the next event. And so I don't quite understand it from that viewpoint, to where you know that you can't do anything with this account, and I would think that the only kind of like realistic thing you could be doing is knocking other players out of that top cut potential. And so if you say, oh, I'm Drissoth, I'm the best in the world, if I go and top cut this event, I can go and knock some of these other good players out, increasing my chances in the future. And so that's the only kind of like angle that I could see with it, but it doesn't entirely make sense to me. And then the last thing I have on this piece is I'm not entirely convinced that Riot shouldn't just let you do rebuys anyways. And I think having the buys tied into that is fine. Like how much like dedication are you going to make to this thing, right? So let's say we jump into the event, we go 0-2, we drop. That sucks. We jump back in, and now we go 6-3, and we drop. And so are we going to try and make a third run? Are you willing to dedicate 14 to 16 hours of your day to this event? If you have that dedication, then, more power to you. Go for it. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think the thing that is necessarily a bad thing is moving away from the event being free and moving away from the tie-ins of that trophy reward system into the Runeterra Open. I think that that's something that's really fantastic. It really gives a lot of incentive to playing the game every day. And I think taking that away from players just because of a few bad folks would be really disappointing. Okay, so this next section, it's going to be called Dude! Exclamation point. You're cheating. Period. And so this is one of the things that kind of surprised me. We did see some questionable play in the top 8s. If it's cheating or not, I'm not going to be the one to decide, but I will say I'm not entirely surprised whatsoever that someone was potentially cheating or taking unscrupulous efforts to win in an event that has money on the line. This has happened throughout history, throughout time. This isn't anything new. Across the history of my Magic career, like I know playing in those Junior Super Series events, you had to be 15 or under or no Pro Tour points. I played against people with Pro Tour points. People were doing it there. I know in the early history of Magic, it was a very Wild West in terms of cheating. You were more well known for being a non-cheater than for being a cheater. It was just assumed that everyone at the event was cheating. And if you were one of the few people that were well known for playing honestly, then you had this like big pedestal that you were on for being just a normal human being. And then as time went on, things like the Star City Opens happened. You would have people that actively and openly cheated while on stream. You would have people that would manipulate the decks. They would run scams. They would actively cheat while they were on camera, and then people would later surface this up and be able to say, oh yeah, this dude was manipulating the deck at this point. Check this time spot. You can see him doing underhanded shuffles and getting the things where they go. Like, it's just not even close. You can even look at things like one of my more classic pictures is, if I forget what Pro Tour it was for Magic. I'm sure some of you old folks that remember the Magic events, there was it would have been the Odyssey Torment Pro Tour, as to where there's Zvi Moshowitz. He's sitting there at the draft table, and then Trey Van Cleve is sitting right next to him, just fucking staring at his hand while he's making his draft picks. Like, it's not anything new that people cheat at these things, and when there's some kind of incentive involved, people are going to do it. And so I'm not advocating for cheating. I think it should be removed in the most best ways and most effective ways possible. But I think you have to really come out and define what cheating is going to be. And so the things that this is coming from in terms of this Runeterra Open are two spaces. Number one, tying back to the MMR whoopsies, there was the kind of thought that, hey, these people were playing on multiple accounts. What should we do with the multiple accounts? And so I don't understand the reasoning for doing it. I understand that there are some edges that could be had, but it's kind of up to Riot to come out and say, hey, if you're going to do this, we're going to ban you. Or, hey, if you do this, we're going to suspend your account for a year. Hey, if you do this, you can still play, but you can't play in competitive events. To the best of my knowledge, Riot hasn't come out and said, hey, you can't do this. There's no tournament rulebook for Riot as you would have in something like from Wizards of the Coast. And so while there are these kind of witch hunts, if you will, of people coming out and trying to take down these people, I think that Riot is going to have to kind of go through the learning curve process of designing this stuff and putting it out here and say, hey, you can't do this, because there is even argument that what I did was cheating. Right? We played in that beta open on 2 separate accounts. That has some credence to be cheating. Was it illegal according to Riot? I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. It's kind of the same deal that you saw with the deck trackers. With the deck trackers, you were able to pull in your opponent's deck list from the previous game and then kind of have the open deck list directly in front of you as you were playing. I used that feature for a little bit. Some of my viewers told me that was illegal. I didn't know. Once I was told, I stopped doing it. And so there is kind of a communication element to these things. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't inherently know that this is probably against the rules, but if Riot doesn't come out and directly say, hey, you're not allowed to do this, then people are going to do it. The one that is bigger to me is, I had to stop and spell a big word, is timer manipulation. As far as the timers go, my understanding of what you're able to do is say, we play game 1. I win game 1. Great, go me, hurrah. We get into game 2. Things aren't looking that good, so I start roping, and we really just come out and try and drag the game on to where the timer gets down to almost nothing before the game is done. Then, as we get into game 3, the match no longer has any time. The game ends. Since I won game 1, I win the match. That's my understanding of how it works, and my understanding of what someone in the top cut of either the EU or the APAC region was doing. Not just in the top cut, but somewhere near the finals is where they were pulling that off. And again, is it illegal? Is it against the rules? I don't know. But I think Riot needs to kind of come out and say, hey, you're not allowed to do this. The timer works as it does. You need to be making the honest and best case effort to not be manipulating this. And if we see you actively cheating, we're going to ban you. And so, again, I think whatever that person was doing was kind of unscrupulous. That's probably actively cheating, but it's in that gray area. I don't agree with it, but I think that Riot, has to come out and say, hey, if we see you doing this in a tournament, you're going to get removed. The last thing that I think is kind of interesting is what I'm going to call team play. And it's another space as to where it's kind of a gray area. And in terms of things like Magic, it's always kind of existed. Whether or not it should, it's kind of up in the air. Whether or not it should be legal, you probably can't even really police it. But there's a couple of different scenarios where this comes about. The first one I want to kind of bring forth is concessions. This isn't something like, hey, I need a snack, I need a little popcorn in between rounds here. This would be the kind of hypothetical scenario as to where, say, Majin Bei and Akaido are playing in one of these events. Majin Bei, greatest in the world of all time, right? He's 8-0. He's up against his friend and teammate Akaido, who is 8-1. Now, what is the outcome that gets both of these players into the top cut and gets their team further along into Worlds, right? You ideally need to be 9-0 to get those wins. So if Majin Bei jumps into his match against Akaido, he wins. He's now 9-0. Akaido is now 8-2. Majin Bei is going to make the top cut easily without any losses. Akaido probably just got removed for the event. But what if they get together as teammates and friends, and then Majin Bei says, hey, we know that we're better than everyone else in the world. Well, how about I just concede to you? We're both 8-1. We can jump in and play our next round. If we both win, we're both 9-1. We both make the top cut. We can cruise along to victory, take down the rest of the dum-dums, no problem. And that's one of these things as to where maybe that should be legal, maybe it shouldn't be. I don't care. There's no way you can police it. They can jump into the games, throw the games, however you want to do it. That's one of the things that's always just allowed. But the thing that really did want to spark with me, not open dark lists, open deck lists. And I do believe Riot has said that open deck lists are going to be a thing in the future events. The reason I was kind of tying that in with this discussion is one of the points of technology that you used to use was just being on a team. And so in the same example, say Majin Bei sees that his friend Akaido gets paired against someone else. Majin Bei played him earlier in the event. He can now go to Akaido and say, hey, my dude, he's playing this one copy of Vile Feast in his deck. Be on the lookout for it, right? You can give him that knowledge, share that knowledge with him that he wouldn't normally have. And the way that this is kind of active and in play now is with, again, the deck tracking sites. I didn't even realize this was the thing that you could currently do, but let's say that I'm up against an opponent. I can take his name, I can go type it into the deck tracking site, I can look at his most recent matches, see the deck lists that he's played there, and now I'm informed to his deck list to where he may not be informed to mine. And again, we didn't do it. I didn't know that that was a thing that you can potentially do. I know that you can kind of like mask your username so you're a little bit harder to find on the deck tracking sites. And so you can do that to kind of protect yourself from it. But I think it's just absurd that you should have to go through those links. I don't think that it's knowledge that you should know that you need to have. I don't think it's knowledge that you should know that you need to go and mask, and that they should just show the deck lists. And so I think, to the best of my knowledge, open deck lists are supposed to be something that's happening in the future events, but I think it's something that should be known to everyone. And so I know I have that in this kind of dude, you're cheating section. I'm not trying to imply in any way that any of these people I've made mention of in this section are in fact cheaters. It's just those are common names within the community. They're on the most well-known team in the game. It's very easy to just use their names. Again, don't take any of this as me saying that these people are cheating. That's not what I'm saying whatsoever. But this is, I feel like, a very reasonable space to say, hey, there's a lot of gray area around this. I may have done this. I may not know that you could do this, but Riot has made no official announcement on it. And I feel that this is another kind of space where Riot needs to kind of say, hey, if you're doing this stuff, or we know that this stuff is available, it causes problems. And so we need to make a statement on it as to what we're going to be doing in the future. Okay, so the last piece in this kind of section is the PC clock problem. And so someone figured out that if you take the the timer on your computer, the clock on your computer, and you switch it, then you're able to still get in the gauntlet outside of the hours of the event. And so you would theoretically be able to, say, set your timer on your computer to 6 hours earlier. You get a second account or a friend to set their timer 6 hours earlier. You both go and queue up. You're the only two people in the event because it's 6 hours before it's supposed to start, and then your opponent can just concede to you. And after you do that a few rounds each, just kind of cherry picking your opponents willing to concede to you, you should very easily come in and 9-0. Again, this is something I don't think it's a big deal. Let me scratch that. I do think it's a big deal that you can just kind of get free wins outside of the system like this, I don't think it's a big deal in the sense that Riot will fix it quickly. And I feel like you should be spotted pretty quickly as well. And so it should be a fairly easy check for Riot to say, oh, look, Bust was playing from the hours of 1 a.m. to 2 a.m., and he spiked 9 wins in 45 minutes. This is very suspicious to me. Maybe I should remove this. And so I understand how these kind of things make it into the game, but I think this is a fairly easy one to fix, and I don't think it's something to be in an uproar about. Okay, so we're going to call this last section what Bust would like to see. And so I think that there's two really big things on this. The first one is gotta get the times right. And so this is something that I feel like was pretty egregious. This is what should have been considered the worst outcome of this event, at least in my opinion, in that the times that are communicated to you and when things are going to happen didn't happen that effectively. The time to end the event shown on the Gauntlets tab was different than what was shown in the Tournaments tab, and so you had people that were running into this space to where you want to take a little bit of a break before you play your final match. You take a 30-minute break. You thought you had an extra hour, and it turns out you didn't. And so they have to fix those times. That communication needs to be fixed. I also ran into some problems with this as to where if you say, look at the Gauntlet timers, they are set based on your local time zone. And so there for a while, Gauntlets were starting at noon for me. I'm in the Central Time as the daylight savings time started or ended, however that shit goes. It moved from noon to 1 for me. And now if I come in and look, we got our 9 wins. The thing says, hey, come back and check at 8 a.m. tomorrow to see if you've qualified for the main portion of the event. Does that mean check in at 8 a.m. in my time or 8 a.m. in Pacific time? There's no really way to determine which is going to be which and what's going to be happening for you. And so that's something that I think that most importantly needs to be cleaned up. I guess maybe the match win based matchmaking is probably a little bit more important, but the communication on this style of thing needs to be kind of fixed very, very easily. They need to come out and just say, hey, this is when you have the time to play. They need to fix this stuff in the client, because I feel like if you're making the decisions based on that information and that information is wrong, then that's a very big blow. Okay, and then the last thing I have is to say the structure. I think all in all, as a first shot, this was pretty good. The thing I would like to see and where I think the problem tends to lie, I had the same problem with seasonals as to where the goalposts kind of move and you don't really know where you stand in terms of qualification. And even if you are running kind of good, I think I saw Grandpa Roji talking about it, where I believe he started off 6-0, then went 6-2, then finished off 9-2, but didn't have enough in there to make the top cut. And you never really kind of know, since there's no standings, there's no active thing to see where you stand in terms of the remainder of the ranks, where the goalposts stand. And so you're checking Twitter, seeing what's happening in APAC, seeing how things are working there. You know that that's the smallest region, so things are a little bit different, but that's all you have to go on. And so I believe in APAC, everyone at 9-1 made it. Some people at 9-2 made it. Then I think you moved to Europe, and there were players that were 9-1 and didn't make the top cut. And then having Americas be larger in terms of player base, I would assume that you had to be 9-1 in the Americas as well. I didn't see an official number, but it's too much to know. There's too much to tell what you actually need to do to qualify, and I feel like everyone should just qualify. And so that's what you started to see in terms of Magic, right? With Magic, in terms of the Grand Prix structure, that was the kind of same styled big event to where you played 9 rounds on the first day, and then the sex day, lol. The next day would cut to the top 64, or the top 128, or whatever. But then they started getting events that would have like 6 and 7 and 8,000 people in it. And if you wanted to make the second day in like a 7,000 person event, then you had to like 10-0, or you had to go 9-1 on the first day, and it started to become pretty unreasonable as you're looking at the top cuts. You're going to cut to a top 128, and then you're cutting off like 60 people that have the same record. And so what they started to do in Magic was to say, okay, well, you make the second day if you're there at X and 2. And so if it's a 10 round event, if you go 8 and 2, you make the second day. If it's a 7 or a 9 round event, you go 7 and 2, you make the next day. And so I feel like that's the way that these open events should work as well. If we're going to set the barrier to be at 9 wins, then everyone that's 9-0, 9-1, 9-2, they get to play in the second day. The structure of the second day then should be edited to kind of compensate and fill in for that. Or if you want to look at it in the terms of, say, that Magic Open event that we've been talking about, they have it set up to where if you go 8 wins in our terms of our event here. If you went 8 wins in the Open, you get to play in the second day. If you had 9 wins, then you would get a bye in the second day. And so there's a lot of different things that you coid do to structure it that way. But I think with the structure that the goalposts are so different and weird that you should just say, hey, if you have this record or if you have this number of wins, I like number of wins because it ties in with the Gauntlet theme. But if you have this number of wins, then you get to participate in the second day. Then I don't have the answer for the second day. I don't know what the best way is. I don't know if you want to just what I have in mind as being nice is just playing another Gauntlet, and you can have multiple winners. And so I know it's nice having that kind of finality to an event, but I think it's okay if you just say, all right, there's 4 winners to this event. You know, there's 4 people on the second day that went 7-0. Those people are the winners for the day. Congratulations. Cheer together. High five each other. You know, you were good. You did it. And so I don't know if the second day is best deserved as kind of an open gauntlet or if it's need to be stuck in the more Swiss style of event. I don't know. I don't have the answers, but I do know that it feels bad that when you run into that space. You saw the same thing on the second days into Magic, is to where when you were making that top cut into the top 8, you would have like 12 and 13 people that had 3 losses, and you have to stop at top 8. And that feels mega bad if you have the same record as someone else making the top cut and you don't make it. And so I think that kind of style is to where the barrier is the number of wins and not necessarily a single elimination style event is good. But I know that there's a lot of controversy around that kind of thing. And so people really like having that finality. They really like having that indicator. They had that one guy or gal or person, whatever we're going to say, holding up the trophy at the end of the day. And, you know, it's tough if you don't have that. But I know that that's what a lot of people really want, as opposed to just a strict win-based kind of system. Okay, so outside of the parlance of the actual event itself, there were a couple of other things. There is more stuff Bust would like to see, and this just ties into the display and availability of the event itself. And so I think that there should be some kind of stream and or coverage. It sounds like there are people out there willing to do the work. I believe it's Aegis Esports that was just kind of like, hey, if you plan on streaming, tell us. We want to cast some of your games. We're just trying to do whatever we can to get this Runeterra Open content out there to the people. And so I think it's completely fine if Riot doesn't want to do anything. I understand that it takes a lot of resources and people and time and money to put together these coverage teams and get that going. But if they don't want to do it, I feel like they should give some of these other people willing to do it the tools to come out and get that coverage out there to the people. And so if it's Aegis Esports or whoever else is doing it, Sparkling Iced Tea, I believe over in the European region, there are people that are actively trying to put forth the coverage. I think if you don't want to do it yourselves, let them do it. It's not the most cost-effective thing to do. I get that. You're not making any money off of your stream, but I think that really drives a lot of positivity in the community being able to see that kind of thing. The next thing I have to say is it feels like kind of an odd one. We're just going to call it celebrity. I don't know the proper term to say with this, but it's one of those things I was really kind of thinking about as we were seeing a lot of the drama unfold from this event, and the random, the Twitter was talking to call them the random silver players or however it was. And there were some prestigious players that had made the top cut. They had fairly challenging paths to get there. And then you had the silver players that had the easy way to go because of the MMR system or the collection-based system or what have you. And I think that actually brings kind of like an interesting story to the mix, right? One of the things that I think is actually pretty interesting that you don't see in Runeterra is the story. And so one of the things I kind of think of is I used to follow the LCS in the League of Legends a little bit, and I have these things like stuck in my brain as to where there was Reckless, right? Reckless was like 13 or 14 years old when he got picked up by his team. You had to be like 15 or something to actually play in the LCS. So they were carrying this minor on their team until his birthday. His birthday hit, he got to come in and start playing. Like that was a big story. It didn't have anything to do with what an amazing player he was. It had to do with like the story around him and building up a story around the people. You would see the same thing with someone like Bjergsen, right? Bjergsen was one of the best mid laners in Europe. He took the high dollar package to come to the Americas and play for TSM, right? That doesn't have anything to do with how awesome that play he made with LeBlanc was, that sweet thing he did with Victor, whatever. That was more of the personal story, right? It's why whenever you're watching the random cooking show on TV or The Amazing Race or whatever, they have the real like heart-wrenching stories, right? The dude that battled cancer and beat it, the dude in The Amazing Race racing with one leg, like whatever the deal is, there's always some kind of story component to it that's always way more interesting than having like the two most effective people do battle, right? And so one of the unfortunate things that I kind of see come out of this is, say we look at the previous worlds. The winner was Aragorn. I could not tell you what region he was from. I don't know if he was from Americas or from EU. I don't believe he was from APAC. If you showed me a lineup of three separate people, I could not pick out which one he was. If you tried to tell me like what his age is, or tell me one interesting factoid about the current world champion, I just couldn't do it. And that's where a lot of the interesting storylines come from, right? The thing that drive people in, the things that bring people back, is having that story as to why this is interesting. And to a degree, is it interesting when you have the titans of the world, the heavyweights, right? The number one and the number two doing battle in their digital dick measuring contest to see who is the strongest player in the world. Yes, there is some credence to that, but I feel like the thing that really draws people in, the thing that really makes things interesting, is the kind of story behind the players, and you don't get any of that in the current space of Runeterra. You don't get any of that in the broadcast. There's no like bio of the player that pops up before it's about to be there, and I feel like that's something that's really missing. And so I think the place that you have to kind of understand is that we get really kind of like caught up within the competitive scene, and we think all that matters is the competitive stuff. But if you switch over to Reddit, I think the main subreddit is a great place to kind of see this, as to where the top posts, I think, over the past couple of days were like, some dude cosplayed as Pantheon, and then there's like someone got Zoe to Mastery 42069, and it's just it's a lot of stuff like that. There's such a giant cross section of players that get interest in the game that while you as a competitive player may not be super interested in the current world champion's favorite dinner dish, but that's the kind of thing that really draws people in. It's that story outside of the game that brings them in and makes it interesting, and I feel like that's really been lost across the course of the coverage of these events and the like. And so, food for thought, if you will, in addition to Aragorn's favorite food for dinner. And so I feel like we covered off on a lot of stuff, a lot of topics, a lot of things. If we have to say something to tie it all together, one grand statement for the entirety of the event and the thing that happened with it, I think it was positive. I think it was good. It gives me a lot of hope for the things in the future. It makes me excited to continue on in the competitive scene of Runeterra. I think it's all well and good and great. And so that is going to do it for us today. Agree or disagree? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. And that is going to do it. And so this is Bust, and we thank you for being here.